Paul, which Paul?
Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 7:01 and ask Cindy, the city clerk, to read the statement of compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act into the record, please.
This meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, with notice provided to the Trenton Times and the Huntington County Democrat. The meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board at City Hall and the city's website. Roll call.
Yes, please.
Sean Goodwin.
Present.
Michelle Harris.
Here.
Brian Kelly.
Here.
Paul Poole. Paul Stevens.
Present.
Julia Taylor. Councilman Lyde.
Here.
Mayor Noack.
Here.
And Andrew.
Great. Please note that we also have Elaine and Kelly here.
Yep.
For the record. All right, we'll rise for the pledge of allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Seated. Begins by reading the mission statement of the committee into the record. The Affordable Housing Advisory Committee will develop a proactive, holistic strategy to meet Lambertville's, New Jersey state mandated affordable housing responsibilities. For an open, transparent process, the committee will develop input to a housing element and fair share plan that identifies pragmatic options to meet the city's collective remaining third round and new fourth round requirements, while also reflecting broader community priorities and concerns raised by city residents. Affordable Housing Advisory Committee will analyze and assess options and document final recommendation for the city council. Right, welcome everyone. We're going to begin by considering motion to approve the April 14th, 2025 meeting minutes. Questions about the minutes? Second. All those in favor who are eligible, say aye. Aye. Okay. Motion carries.
Now, would you move the?
Yes. Excuse me. Yes. I don't have much in the way of updates to share with the committee since we last met. I can just offer a couple of updates. The city council continues to meet with developers of village apartments, and so I can say at the moment we're in meetings with them. I have requested a couple of times a meeting with the owner of the CVS property through his attorney, and have not had any success in setting that up. And lastly, I'm having some conversations about the South Hunterman apartments with a couple of different parties, and I haven't had a chance to update the council on that yet, but there's some positive potential here. And so I will be sure to update the council first, and the committee at a later date. That's really all I have in terms of updates with specific property owners that we've been talking about over the last 6 months. Are there any questions about any of that?
What's the most recent conversation with the spokesworks owner?
Well, I had an email from the spokesperson today. So that's the most recent. It's not really a conversation because I haven't responded yet. But yes, there has been some communication, and we'll talk more about the spokeswork probably in detail in the next part of the meeting. Any other questions? We're going to move right into a conversation of the draft fourth round housing plan element and fair share plan. So first of all, thank you to Elaine for putting together this 230-page plan. It's an amazing document, and though a lot of it's, as you said, some of it's boilerplate, a lot of it has to be generated by it. So it's a tremendous amount of work, and we're grateful for it. And I read it through several times. Cindy did as well for some minor editing, and I know how much work it was put together. So thank you for that. And I'm gonna turn this over to Elaine just to kind of hit the highlights of what we're talking about in terms of the fourth round. So this is not gonna be unfamiliar to people. We talked about kind of what we envisioned as the necessary mechanisms to comply with our fourth round unmet need. And we'll turn it over to you, and then we'll sort of get more into conversation as we get to the spokesperson part of it.
Sure.
Elaine, could you use the microphone? Thank you.
I will dive into the fourth round in just 1 second. There are just a couple of things I want to highlight. So first of all, are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This plan is actually 2 documents. The first part is the housing plan element, where there's a lot of required information that nobody ever reads. But I will note just a couple things that might be of interest to this committee. One is, I don't know if you have it, but on page 9, we just got the 2025 income limits, which tells you the level at which people qualify for affordable housing. So for example, a 2-person household can make up to $98,240 before they are making too much money to qualify for affordable housing. Those income limits just came out.
Sorry, what page are you on?
I'm sorry, that was page 9. Paginated page 9. It's probably page
13.
There you go, thank you. So
Okay.
9 plus 4.
I see it now.
Then a lot of the rest of this is just boilerplate. All the census stuff has to be there. As I said, probably nobody ever reads it, but we have added 2 things to the census information that we have not previously put in a housing plan. One is, where are we? Oh, I wanted to point out a couple of things about the city's demographics, particularly if you look at what would be in your document, page 24, paginated page 20. The change in household size is really remarkable. There are many, many more 2-person households now than there were 10 years ago. Which is something to keep in mind. I realize that the municipality can't pivot and all of a sudden deliver a lot of small units, but it does look like there's going to be a demand for smaller units. And that actually, on the next page, we get to that. The table 16, this is the first time we've done this, where we compare household size to unit size in the city. And the bottom line is there are many, many more smaller households than there are smaller units. So either people are looking for smaller units in other places, or they're paying more money for a unit that's bigger than their needs, or they're doubling up. I think a lot of this just highlights that there is a need for smaller units in the city. The other thing that we put in that we have not put in the past on page 23, so that we document page 27, is the jobs housing ratio, which in Lambertville is not terrible. We work in a municipality where the ratio is almost 3-to-1 jobs to housing. So they're a big major regional employment center, which means that more than 20,000 people commute into that town every day. So the jobs housing ratio is kind of a measure of how many people can't live here and commute from outside, or how many people live here and have to commute outside to work. In that, we have 1,899 Lambertville residents who leave the city to go to work, and 970 people who come in from outside to work in Lambertville. But that's most of Lambertville's workforce, is that 972 people. So if there's an opportunity to see if they want to live more locally and not have to drive here, there may be some benefit to the city in reducing traffic that way.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
This only tracks people who are working outside of their home, right? So it's the movement of people,
That's
not
right.
so much people.
That's
there are
right.
still people working in Lambertville, they're working from home and therefore
Yes.
not being recorded
That's
because
right.
they're not moving around.
That's right.
Okay.
And this is 2022 is the most recent year for which this number is available. So things may even have changed a little bit since then. It does track people who work from home when it talks about distance to work, but that's not included here. I can find that out easily for you if that's of interest.
Is this for the census data?
It is the census, it's
CES or-
CES,
CES.
yes. There's a website called On the Map that actually does a really nice graphic job of showing inflow, outflow, where people travel to for work, where people come from for work. So moving on then to the actual housing plan, which is page 29. This is the page 28 is where the actual, this is the second document. First one is the housing plan element. This is the fair share plan, which says, here's our obligation and here's how we're going to fulfill it. We have a fourth round rehabilitation obligation of 0, but I think we're still continuing with the small cities program, right? For anybody who knocks on the door, we have that available.
We do, yeah.
Yep. Okay, there was no prior round obligation for the city. And we've talked a lot about the city's third round obligation that got split into a realistic development potential and an unmet need. One of the things that we did, as you know, for the fourth round is we went back and looked at that vacant land analysis that generated the third round numbers to see, as we are required to do, whether there are any newly vacant parcels that could develop with affordable housing. There was only one that was big enough. It is entirely constrained by steep slopes and a C1 stream buffer. So when you're looking at vacant land alone, the city has a realistic development potential of 0. Now, I do want to read the obligations. So the updated vacant land analysis starts on page 45, which would be page 49 in the document. All right, so at the bottom of page 45, the new law is quoted, and it says, requires that any municipality that receives an adjustment of its prospective need obligations for the fourth round or subsequent rounds based on a lack of vacant land shall, as part of the process of adopting and implementing its housing element and fair share plan, identify sufficient parcels likely to redevelop during the current round of obligations to address at least 25% of the prospective need obligation that has been adjusted. And the big question is, what does that number refer to? Does it refer to the entire obligation that has been adjusted? So our obligation for the fourth round is 39. Do we need to come up with realistic zoning to cover 25% of 39? There are quite a few lawyers who have said, no, it is realistic development potential because you need realistic zoning to make the development happen, the redevelopment happen. We have a realistic development potential of 0. So did we have to come up with anything? There are planners who are doing it based on unmet need only. If we had a realistic development potential, this requirement would apply to what was left over. There is no clarity on this requirement at all. We are arguing that because of the requirement for realistic zoning that allows for such adjusted obligation, it applies to the RDP, the realistic development potential, which in the city's case is 0, but the city is making the good faith gesture of identifying a site that could redevelop with an inclusionary development of, let's say, 40 units that would generate 6 affordable units out of 15% set aside. And that is the Spokesworks property, because I think the owner has expressed some interest in that kind of redevelopment. So we can talk about Spoke. I'll come back to that if we want to. Just move it. We had to do a full analysis of whether the Spokeworks property was a realistic property. We had to do the analysis of how we satisfy all our formula obligations, which we do. And then we move on to administration. The fourth round rules are not codified yet. So we have said we're not going to update the affordable housing ordinance. We're not going to update the mandatory set aside ordinance. We're not going to update the affirmative marketing plan until the rules are finalized and we know what it is we have to update to. So you would see in the appendices that the existing adopted documents are included. They are still in effect until we amend them. And finally, way back at the last 10 pages is the spending plan, which is how we have to allocate affordable housing trust funds that have come in through development fees. I think I changed only certain of the pages to reflect 2025. So thank you everybody for noticing that. I will fix that. And I just wanted to point out that it is there. We do have development fees. We did not budget development fees from any redevelopment of the Finkel site. We have no idea what that's gonna look like. But we do note that and say we'll amend this if we have to, once we have more details on that. And this just goes through how fees are collected, what they must be spent on, and a schedule for expenditures. So that's as much as I was gonna cover, unless people have questions.
Back to this ambiguity about what the 25%
Yeah.
applies to,
Yeah,
all right? If it turns out that it is the RDP of 0 that it applies to, we don't have anything, but we've said that we're putting 6 units in spokeswork. Are those then stuck, like, we can't go use third round stuff in the fourth round? Could we, if the RDP is 0 and we need 25% of 0, could we take those 6 in the future and apply them to anything that's existing in the third round?
I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question. We
Because
didn't,
we don't want to necessarily lock ourselves out of flexibility with that if we're committed for what was unmet need when we still have, potentially have realistic development.
I think the answer to that is probably yes, but we have to change the RDP. In other words, the third round RDP right now is 88. If we're gonna add the spoke works to it, it's a new site that wasn't counted in the RDP initially. So those 6 units would take 88, this is me doing math in my head, 88 to 94. We would have to raise the RDP to 94, and then it's
Why
a
would we-
self-liquidating increase.
Why would we raise that if we're still short on things from the
Because
third
we're
round?
adding a site that is realistically generating affordable units that was not considered. So it's a new site. I know, don't move, but
So anything in the future we come up with for meeting things that are still outstanding in the third round that weren't, that, you know, popped up and weren't even considered back then?
well, don't forget, if we raise the RDP, we reduce the unmet need. It doesn't change, it doesn't
Well,
increase.
right now we have
overall.
RDP that's not, potentially not going to, that's having trouble getting that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So. If some,
But that site is,
but it would be because the site that was put into the RDP turned out to be flawed.
that's a different question.
Well, that's the question I guess I'm really asking.
Yeah, that's a different question.
Okay, so what's the different answer?
So the answer is, once there is documentation that that site is no longer realistic, then the conversation starts about changing the RDP for the third round. This is a fourth round thing.
I understand that,
Okay.
but we're committing it to the fourth round right now, and I wanted to understand if that commits us, if that commitment locks us in, if our assumption about applying it to unmet need, 25% of unmet need, turns out to be wrong, that it was 25% of RDP.
No, we're applying it to RDP. Right
We have
now,
that.
we're in the best possible position. If our assumption is wrong, we have to apply it to unmet need, then it can't go anywhere. We need it for unmet need.
So we are locking it in the fourth round, is what I'm hearing you say.
If a court of competent jurisdiction would clarify that language for us, we would have a better answer. Right now, we're applying this against RDP. Our RDP is 0. It's basically a good faith gesture to say we've looked for redevelopment sites and found one.
Other questions?
Well,
Did you have any, did you want to?
my other question has to do with the spokesworks in particular, and that there was only 15% of the 40 units applied, when I thought the set aside was 20%. So there's 2 units potentially that are unaccounted for.
I think the set aside right now says 15% for rentals.
Is it 15% for rentals or is it a redevelopment thing? I forget. It's in here somewhere. and
I
ran
think
across
it's
it.
15% for rentals. It really should be 20%, and that's one of the things we may want to amend.
Because we've
Right
been
now,
talking,
it says-
we've been talking like everything's 20%.
Yeah, right now, I think it says 15% for rentals.
Maybe we need to get that straight.
Yeah, hang on.
Maybe not right this
Actually,
minute, but not this, but
Hold
Well, it's the ordinances that we say. Gotta go look at the ordinances.
Yeah, that's right.
If you, I know where you can find it,
Ordinances.
51. Well,
Citywide mandatory, here we go. Yep, 20% for sale, 15% for rent.
Right.
Yeah, we should amend that to make it 20% in all cases, but right now it's set at 15%.
And that's noted in the section on the spoke works that they will provide 15%. On page 51. And I just want to talk a little bit about that process. So just to make sure that, and this is going to may or lead organically into the next topic, or we might segue into that a little bit. But so we talked a little bit about the spoke work site here in the committee, right? So it was identified as one of the priority sites. And this has been one of the, I don't want to say challenges, but this has been one of the, I'll say challenges to the work that the committee can do, right? So I had to go in and sort of talk to property owners about these properties, and then ultimately, because this is an advisory committee, I had to take the information to the council in order for them to sort of negotiate and to consider what the city was willing to kind of move forward with in terms of redevelopment on a particular site. So that we did. I met with the property owner, I think twice, with Clark and Vince, and then we met as a council and considered what we thought was appropriate and best for the site. So you guys, this committee was left out of that discussion because it's just not a function of this committee. So I want to acknowledge that, and I think that's something that we need to be talking about. We're going to talk about what this committee is and might be, and whether we want to continue it. And I want to get everybody's views on that, and to what extent, and this may not happen tonight. Tonight we might get this started and continue it in the next meeting or two, but where we see the committee going and what potential authority it might want to seek in terms of a structure through an ordinance with the council, et cetera, right? So I would like to put that out there.
I mean, can you just describe the discussions on what a plan for the spokesworks might look like? I mean, we have a diagram or a site map in the plan. What part of the spokeswork lots would the development occur on?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it is early. I think the discussion was knocking down the cinder block building and doing sites, but it is very, very early for that.
Yeah, so we've been able to calculate at a minimum the 40 units, right? And see that as appropriate, working with setbacks and other kind of general requirements. But yeah, there's no plan. There's nothing that's been kind of, we have enough to get to put forward an ordinance to allow for this to happen.
That's almost like our strategy of doing that too. Like we didn't want to do too much. We wanted to do just enough where we were compliant with it, but then, have the ability to discuss with the developer about future needs too. So I think the concern was we didn't want to go too far with it. So we sort of, came up with, it's a, I don't want to call it bare minimum plan, but a more basic plan.
Yeah, there's some draft bulk standards in here, I think.
Right.
But the nice thing about one of the few nice things about this law is that it says you can submit draft ordinances by June 30th. They don't have to be adopted till March. So we have time to fine tune in to the needs of the site and the developer.
Yeah, and keep in mind that, this happened in a short period of time, right? So these conversations with the property owner and the council have really only happened in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So actually drafting a plan, I mean, the property owner did have some ideas about plans that he was interested in and presented those to the city. And so we did have to, it's fair to say that he is interested. I mean, that's here. He had approached the city a few years ago with some suggested ideas. And so he was really ready to step up to the plate. As you all know, this is really the only property that we've been able to identify in this time frame, that has kind of a realistic potential.
But wasn't the CVS property, their CVS lease is up in 2026? Doesn't that make it that,
Well, only insofar as you can get a property owner to speak to you about it. So, I mean, I spoke to the property owner, and I've said this in past meetings, he's concerned about the CDS and the lease, and in subsequent requests, I've been unable to set a meeting. So, you can only go so far as, to remember that own the property, right? I can't get the property on the phone, there's not much I could do. So I understand, and I think that we've all agreed, I believe we've all agreed that that's a good site, right? And that's a site that is bound for redevelopment at some point. I would have loved to have seen it happen, before we got into a pinch, before we had to even start working on this. But we didn't, and I know that Mayor Fall, I talked to the property owner some years ago. There was even some ideas out floating around and just never took, so.
I will say, if you look on page 26, we did build in to this plan, we reserve the right to amend it if any additional sites come forward as being likely to redevelop in the next 10 years. So
I
if
thought
the
that only
CBA,
applied to the 295.
no, it's
applies to
lands
all-
likely to.
any site?
Yeah, any site, yep.
Good.
So to be clear about the CVS site, we can talk about it all we want, but it's private property. And the property owner, once the CVS lease ends, the private property owner can do whatever they want with that property. And it's not necessarily, it looks like an opening for us, but that's kind of hopeful right now, right? And that could turn over into some other lease for somebody else that we don't know anything about, just to be clear.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, the other way to potentially move forward would be to do a study to see whether it could be declared an area in need of rehabilitation or an area in need of redevelopment. Because there's two separate categories with separate criteria. If it was declared, it met all the criteria, 7 of them, I think, 9 of them, for an area in need of redevelopment.
Only needs one.
What's that?
There are 8 or 9, you only need one.
Yeah, okay. Then we could, develop, working with the council, we could develop a redevelopment plan, that's in place, for the future.
So I
But they could also fight that, and I mean, isn't that effectively what happened with the high school site? In the, we went into condemnation there, and because it was private property, but we wanted to put it in the plan. And said that it needed to be, what was the second category?
I think there was an eminent domain issue with that.
Well, I mean, there is in private property in
Yeah, but
general.
this is
isn't it?
different than the CDS that we're talking about, where we could establish it as an area of redevelopment, in need of redevelopment, and that would not be necessarily a government taking.
But how could we dictate then what that redevelopment consisted of?
Well, it's a minimum, right? So if you remember the high school, the area that we need to redevelop in high school, the city picked those numbers and said, this is what we're going to allow, right? And so in case where a developer comes in, they either agree to that or they negotiate a different number. But the basic framework is in place.
But the seller is what I'm saying. What makes him have to sell it to the developer?
He doesn't,
No.
he could
Yeah,
develop it
that's what I'm
himself.
saying. I mean,
So-
just because he has to redevelop it, just because we say it needs redevelopment.
No, but we've got a mechanism there, and what that shows is that the city is interested in redeveloping that parcel. And here's what, if we could, this would be what we would want to see there, right?
Right.
And
That was part of
developers.
the settlement though, with fair share.
The high school.
The-
site.
yeah,
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but I'm talking about
CDS.
redevelopment in general.
Yeah,
right?
but I'm trying
I'm not tying this into.
No, I'm not trying to tie it in.
Just talking about the mechanisms by which a city can express interest and plan for a site that will be out there in the public domain for developers and, all you need is one developer to come in and say, well, I see there's an area in need of redevelopment here, and there's a redevelopment plan. I think it's great, I'll give you X amount of money for the site, and the developer finds, the owner says, okay, I'm like 75, I'm tired, I want to go to Florida, whatever, and so the moment's right, and he moves forward with it, so.
So I actually think that's a valuable thing that our committee can do, where we can make the recommendations to council on those areas that we feel might benefit affordable housing in the future. So I think that is a powerful tool that this committee can offer.
So we'll move on to that discussion. Let's see if there are any other points to be made or questions about the spokes work and you all understand the process and kind of how we came to the decision. If you want some questions or concerns, this is a great time to do it.
So he didn't show any kind of sketch plan for the committee or for in your private meetings?
He did show a couple of plans, yes, that's all I'm gonna say.
Okay.
It's,
Yeah, I just have one question, just getting back to this 15% versus 20%. It isn't too late to amend to 20%, is it?
For that site
For that
or
site.
in going forward?
We can always amend going forward.
For that
Yes.
site,
I
I guess
this
it's-
is currently on the books
Yeah.
and you've
That's kind of.
You know,
might
forward.
be bad thing.
fronted the.
Yeah, I do think there is some provision that, yeah, it would not,
yeah, I just wanted
Gotta
to-
post that.
But the city can also work with that developer too, once there's interest, to try to get them to
Yeah.
incentivized to do more affordable there too. I mean, that's
Yes, you can.
absolutely a
Yeah.
pilot or,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
other.
or we do have affordable housing trust funds. We do need an affordability assistance expenditure if we incentivize the developer to provide very low income units. That counts. So there are opportunities.
And I think going back to that point about, you know, going forward, I think moving forward, I think it's a hole that we missed, and I think we should plug the hole by passing ordinance with the understanding that it's not gonna affect the spoke works, because that wouldn't be fair to that current property owner who's had discussions, but moving forward with further opportunities, I think it's, you know, clearly something that. the
Yeah,
council needs to
I've
consider.
seen no reason why we shouldn't introduce an ordinance, immediately.
Yeah.
Do that.
Okay.
Um,
Can I just go back to something Paul was asking earlier? Kelly pointed out, and she's right, the third round RDP was based on vacant land. Spoke Works was not vacant, and there was no indication that the owner at that time was interested in any kind of additional development. So it was not counted as a property that generated an obligation.
Okay, you see it as.
So-
No, they see it as redevelopable now. No, it's not vacant now.
So what, how's that answer my, but does that clear up my question? I'm not sure it does. I
You would
mean-
ask why it wasn't included in the third round, and that's the reason.
Oh, actually, no, I was wondering if we could go back and put it in, I mean,
Yes, no,
if
we
we
have-
built something there,
Yes,
it would,
but we have to increase the RDP because it was not originally included as vacant land.
So it would generate its own additional units. We specifically crossed off that lot when we calculated at the third round. So if you went back and said, no, it's ready, then you have to increase the RDP.
but, okay.
It
but,
wasn't
well,
ready back then.
Except for the fact that we might have taken something off of that after for, you know,
well, that
now
has to be
we,
negotiated, so.
yeah.
Yeah,
so
it's not
the-
necessarily, it wouldn't have
anyway,
replaced anything. That's the key thing is it
Yes.
would
Well,
not
not
have
replace,
replaced
but
it.
maybe only in negotiations can it replace something, is what I'm hearing, potentially.
Yes, it would have added to the ADU.
Right, but we could potentially, well, say it did, say it was 0 for this round, and we wanted to go back. And because of what we know now, with what's going on with what's the 88, we might try to say, we're not gonna do that up there on that site, period, because of the environmental impact, for example.
But then we still.
But it's 96.
Well, but, well, I'm saying we would still have unmet need in the fourth round. This is all predicated on the fact that that 25% was it, we didn't need to really have the 10 units, we only needed 0 units for the 25%. My hypothetical. I don't know, maybe I'm not being clear.
We can't hold a high school site out.
Not right now.
Right. So anything that we're going to bring into the third round just adds to the RDP. It doesn't replace anything.
Well, with the possible exception of the habitat units, which we may be able to negotiate for the high school units.
No, we're swapping those for the police.
For the police station, I'm sorry,
station.
police station, what did I say?
High
You said
school.
high school, sorry, yeah.
Police
Right.
station,
Yeah,
Right.
they're going in for the high school.
yeah, so.
Well, and the Clausen Farm was on the third round vacant land just analysis.
No, I know, it was.
Yeah.
And that's all confusing, the way the tables are back there, I'll bring that up later.
Anything else on that? So, moving forward, this will be under consideration of the planning board on Wednesday. And then assuming the planning board adopts it, will be reviewed by the city council on the 28th,
26th.
26th. Thank
It's
you.
June 4th for planning. board.
Just getting everything right tonight.
No, you said Wednesday, isn't that right? Wednesday?
Is it next
I
Wednesday?
think so.
Yeah, there's a
This
31st
one
is
we
Saturday.
cleared.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you,
This-
thank you.
31st is Saturday.
You were not wrong about
Yes, okay. So those are the next steps. We do, I'll note, have a meeting scheduled on the 9th. I don't see any reason why we should have that meeting at this, this committee. I would like to, and I'm certainly open to meeting on the 9th, but I think the meeting on the 9th is only going to be to say, oh, the planning board did this, right?
And for whatever it's worth, I'm pretty sure I can't be on that.
Yeah, so I would just propose that we meet on the, what's the last meeting?
That's the 26th, right?
26th, yeah.
Let's see.
25th
It's
is
the
the Wednesday.
25th.
26th is your council. that's
Yeah,
right.
26th is council, 25th. We meet the night before council.
Okay, so I would, I think it's worth meeting on the 25th to continue the discussion that we're about to have about. So I want to make sure that Paul could not be here this evening, and I don't think that, is Julia on or not?
No.
Okay, so we've got a couple of key people missing, so I think we can start the discussion tonight, but if everybody's good with it, we'll cancel the meeting on the 9th and move forward with the meeting on the 25th. That's all okay for everybody?
Do we know if we report, or is everyone planning on being there, obviously, because if they're not there to vote, that's gonna mess us up with getting it.
I'm sure that there's a,
That's right.
yeah, I'm sure there's a foreign. Crystal, but yeah.
They also have a second meeting in
Okay,
June
good.
that's always reserved, whether, and sometimes they don't need it, so they cancel it.
On the 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even if there was a foreign.
Cindy, would we need to renotice if we had to move it to that meeting?
Well, that's really an attorney thing, but
You can
typically they
open-
would open and carry it to that next date.
We were saying meeting on the 25th.
25th, we'll keep that meeting. All right, so I wanted to hear what people think about kind of the work that we've done and if you've got thoughts, let's open this up to what the community would look like if it continues. And what we should be thinking about. So, what are you thinking about this?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand what value you have taken from the committee as an advisory committee. As a committee, not as individuals who have tackled projects. I would assume that in the absence of a committee, you could still get volunteers or task people, voluntold people or whatever, to do certain things. But as a group, what is your perception of the value we've added?
I've been very grateful for the value you've added. I think that the committee showing up and having open conversations in public about specific sites and specific properties and asking questions and really engaging in a way that we've never done holistically and publicly, I think it's been incredibly valuable. If you're asking me about, what are some of the ways in which I would love to see the community kind of evolve? The advisory committees, whether it's the environmental commission or, there are committees who are strictly advisory functions in terms of planning board site plan applications or whatever. And there's a certain limit to what they can do. And you already felt the limit here because a lot of what had to happen, and we talked about this early on, had to happen by me and the council, right? So we were sort of weirdly interlaced for a period of time. And I would love to see the community continue personally. And even if it's only a quarterly thing, I think that there are opportunities for discussion about how we do things, about how we look at sites. I've said, publicly since my State of the City speech in 2023 that I think the city should be having open, active conversations about redevelopment all the time, and not waiting to be reactive, which in my view, we have been for far too long. So, whether it's looking at properties, whether it's giving the community some teeth in terms of authority to have conversations, to do research, to look at properties, to, do any one of a number of things, whether it's, looking for grants or improving on existing programs, or, a committee's only as good as its volunteers and as its leaders and how engaged people are. So I'm personally in favor of it, but I want to make sure that everybody feels the value of it and feels as though whatever it evolves, however it evolves, and even if it doesn't evolve, if we say that this was really just a 6-month ad hoc committee, that it's really served, I think, an important purpose at a minimum of bringing these conversations to the public.
And my question was really about the current committee. I appreciate the comments about going forward. It was really just about the value that, given the constraints, right, that we all felt. And one of the ways that manifested is people who know that we are on the committee would ask certain things. We hear about other things happening, and I would say, I have no idea, I'm not involved in that. And I said, well, we think you're on the advisory committee, how can you not know this? And we understand it kind of sitting up here, but I think that the perception of that is a little difficult to manage. So understanding that we hit the mark you wanted us to meet is good. And going forward, I think that inclusion, however it can be expanded in an appropriate way, would give us more opportunity to contribute to the conversation in an educated manner, as well as just be good for the order.
Yeah, I had to be at the DEP thing today, and I talked a little bit about the importance of just communication, right? I see my job as really one of just moving communication between parties, sharing stories, getting things to a place where somebody makes a decision. And I think having, even if one of my functions is to continually explain how the government works to anybody who comes into the office and says, I do not understand what this is about. And, that has to be a function of everybody on every committee, right? So, it may not seem like it has a lot of immediate value, but every conversation you have, even if you say that this is an advisory committee, but here I am, and I'm participating now in a conversation with you, and, answering questions and getting your interest involved. I think that's got a lot of value. And a lot of the value of the work that we do is, it seems so general as to be not important, but it really is, because every conversation you have with somebody, any way that you can expand anybody's understanding of something, I think is important. So, yeah.
I think it was really such a valuable tool for us all to go through site by site. And I think by doing that and then taking that to the governing body, it helped to facilitate and to move some ideas forward. But the other thing that happened was that I think was very helpful was the FAQs. They were important.
Yeah.
And I would love to see moving forward, maybe not a monthly meeting, but maybe every other month or quarterly. But let's take a look at the materials that we have, because we have limited resources. And when we're writing something, we're writing it like almost from the other side, but to have input from you all to say, that doesn't make sense to me, or maybe if we reworded this, we have so many materials that we're lacking that would be helpful to people who need affordable housing. And from that perspective, I think this committee could really help us on the website, could help us with forms, and help us get our message out.
I think it's interesting, there's a differentiation there, right, between a project that a person could do and feedback that a committee can give. And it just so happens that some of the projects were also done by committee members. And so that's what I was trying to get out, like, as a committee, what are we doing versus something that you could just tap an individual that doesn't necessarily have to be on the committee.
Well, just one more thought, because I think that individuals are great, but if this is the face of affordable housing in Landfill, that's amazing, right? Because I can be the face, like when somebody calls and asks a question, and half the time I'm gonna bumble my way through the answer, unless I really sit down and look at the information and type it up and figure it out. And so I think that individuals are different, right? So Cindy gets we field a lot of calls, Elaine handles a lot of things, but really to have an engagement, a group facing that's really becoming experts and sharing their knowledge and also understanding what the challenges are for the public, right? So, is it a question of having a semi-annual kind of open meeting where people can come and ask questions about how do I apply for affordable housing? Just the basic stuff, right? I mean, there's a lot of things, opportunities out there. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to echo some of what Michelle said, in that, I think there was a perception on the public part that we were gonna be more participatory in some of the things we haven't been. Okay, people have come to me and asked about particulars. Well, I hear this is going on, and I would have to say, you've heard as much as I have, but you're on the committee. We're being looked at to provide a viewpoint into what gets fed up to the council, I think, at some level, at least I know I am. And so we're being looked at as being kind of responsible for whatever goes into the final plan at some level. Currently, okay, I think that was, and so I'm echoing
Yeah.
exactly what she said.
It's a little
And-
uncomfortable, yeah.
Yeah, because, and then I'm just saying, this is information for what's going forward. Because, in terms of individual things, yeah, I mean, last meeting you asked Paul, Cool, and I, if we would look at the financials for, what was it?
Yeah.
Help you guys look at it. Sure, of course we would.
Yeah.
But if there's gonna be a formal committee, we gotta be really clear. Because even with the mission statement that we set out, that mission statement had an implication in it that we were helping to formulate the plan. And people were looking at it as we were gonna know more about it. Not that we would be in a position, I can understand why we weren't, and at certain points we can't, because, we don't have any formal standing. It's advisory. We're not, we're not a part of attorney-client privilege or something. I don't think we are, although yeah.
So I think a lot of those problems, Paul, are just because, as the mayor was saying before, like, we are just very reactive right now. And
Oh,
we
I
have a
know.
time frame that's like, it's lightning speed.
I've
And
said
so-
that from the
No,
beginning.
and so I think if we had been looking at this stuff 4 years ago, if we'd been looking at our affordable housing obligations, realizing that they weren't being complied with, we have these end dates that are coming up. It's not like they just surprised us. They were there. They've been there for 10 years. And so I think the real benefit of this committee is, we've got to stop being reactive. We've got to be proactive. And what I envision is this committee, as we've done, taking a look from the ground up and then making recommendation to the council. So it's not for this June 30th deadline, but it's for the next 10 years of affordable housing in Lambertville. And I think that's where this can be a really powerful committee, and not just for affordable housing, but even like what we think the downtown area is
Yeah,
going to look
Master
like.
plan.
Yeah, the master plan. And I look
That's
at,
what I keep thinking.
yeah, and I look at the questions and concerns the public has regarding the Finkel site. And again, if we had a committee like this that was active 2 years ago, that could have been looking at those things, they could have made recommendations to council, and then these things that are very important to the community could have been addressed before, and, now we sort of don't have that ability. So again, it's that proactive thought, it's looking at the next 10 years of development in Lambertville, what we want it to look like, what the community wants it to look like, with the understanding that we don't know who's gonna own this property, like that's gonna change, and, some development causes other developers to come in, but this is the vision of Lambertville, this is what the community wants, and now we've gotta put it to paper and send it to council and make our
You're
recommendation.
exactly right. I mean, there's sites that ought to be, big sites that ought to be thought about from a proactive standpoint.
Let's look at the downtown area, and there are some levels that are 2 levels and some that are 3, like, we're missing a lot of opportunity possibly there with some really nice looking development.
You have CVS, you have Wells Fargo Bank, you have Lambertville Station. I hate to say this, but the St. John's property needs to be thought about, I think, even though they may be willing to move on that, but I think just to really have control and not be reactive later, I think is really important on those major sites.
I think, I'm sorry. I was just saying, it could be a function of a subcommittee of planning boards, right? Where you have a group of individuals who are working considerations. And also we're very familiar now with the properties and individual properties and working toward an understanding of how those properties could ideally be and should be redeveloped or considered, right?
There needs to be a linkage to, we've talked in general, the general city context about the need for updating zoning and things like that. And I think there needs to be a linkage between whatever this advisory committee is and that, because some of the decisions we'll be making might have zoning implications or vice versa. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one last thing. I'm always got one last thing. I'm sorry. I'm very talkative tonight, apparently. Yeah, I mean, we haven't really looked at zoning, our zoning ordinances in years and years and years and years. Krista says it's been like 15 years, right? So, and yeah, so absolutely. But we need people who stuff up. And I love a mix of people. I don't want just planners and I just don't want people who are like, I agree with me or whatever. I want a good mix of smart people. Go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think that adding on to what you said already, like if we can follow on specific properties like the high school site, like the Habitat site that's currently that works on the Boston Farm, and just like follow what's going on and inform people to the extent we can, that could be a valuable function of the committee going forward. And it wouldn't, like you said, it wouldn't need to meet bi-weekly. Seasonal meetings would be perfectly adequate for that. But I also think being able to nudge like actual, like the council, like bodies with mandate to do things like earlier we had talked about a development that was able to just subdivide their units and kind of skirt around the set aside ordinance. Like if we could just follow along developments that are, in the works and make sure that things like that aren't happening, that the set aside ordinance is being followed. That could be valuable.
Yeah, and just looking at existing things, the 15%, right? I mean, how long has we talk about 20%?
I was surprised to see 15%.
Yeah, so
And in most vacant land towns, it's not 15%. Somehow that got in there.
Yeah.
So,
And just having the ability for the public to come to a meeting and ask questions too about that, I think is really important, which I think that however formed, but it's going to be on the planning board or certainly ad hoc committee, I think there should be at least quarterly meetings, because I think you want to engage the public. And I know, Paul, they're coming to you with questions. You should be telling them, we'll come to the meeting and ask the questions, because that's the best.
Trust me.
That's the best way.
That's my first
Yeah.
response.
yeah, because there's a lot more activity on Facebook complaining about affordable housing than there are people here. Thank you for everybody who's here.
Well,
But how do we close that gap? And I think part of that is the responsibility of this committee also to say, how do we do that and then do it?
well, communication, right? I mean, I can only write so many articles about things and medical matters every week, right? To have somebody on the committee submit something once a month about this is what's happening, in affordable housing this month, or here's something that we're thinking about, or whatever, incredibly invaluable. Right? When matters goes to 2,500 people, it's got a pretty high open rate. So even just basic communication with the public is so important. The first couple of months I was mayor, we had back in COVID days, we were still doing things on Zoom. We had an affordable housing meeting on Zoom. And it was a heavy meeting because there was a lot to be explained. It's highly technical, but you can do those things, but they tend to bog people down and maybe even bore people. But if you've got regular communication about just kind of you're just highlighting certain issues at a time, laser focused things that people can remember and pay attention to, that's all worth. I think it's all worth my time every day, and I think it's worth your time, quite frankly. So I don't know what this looks like, right? I mean, so I want to talk about this, and I want people to be suggesting things, and welcome to send me ideas where they can share, among the group, or I do think we have a lot of opportunity here. He's talking about the city and how we want it to unfold and what we want for the housing to look like.
So we're talking about communication. I think you should write about this in Medical Matters and invite the public to give us their thoughts as well, because they're seeing it from a different perspective than we are. And, obviously we want to make sure we, see what they're seeing as well. So give them an opportunity to.
Well, maybe we put a big push out for a meeting on the 28th and have a, continue the discussion, but people thinking about this.
I think people think about affordable housing as, like, we understand it, it's the capital A, capital H, right? It's a proper thing that we're trying to address, that's legislated, mandated, all those things. I think when I hear the community talking about affordable housing, what they're saying is it is not, as a normal, everyday person going about my life, it is not affordable to live here. And that's a different topic. So I think we need to be clear with people about how do we be inclusive and address those concerns. Maybe it's not part of this committee, but I think it needs to be acknowledged. I think that would put people in seats, right? This is very technical. And what role would the public have to play in this other than their opinion about sites and things like that? But when people talk about, I can't afford to live here, I can't afford to rent an apartment, forget ever buying something. That's a different topic that we don't ever address. And I think people need to understand the difference in terminology.
But we can address it to a certain degree, right? So, when I was campaigning, I was keenly aware of the difference between affordability and affordable housing. It came up a bunch of times. So when I was knocking on doors, and one of the things I asked people, especially seniors, when I was knocking on doors, is have they heard of the senior tax freeze? And I had two people who, in the course of my campaign, who had not heard of it and qualified for it, right? So that's an affordability. Something affordability that, a program that we can, that somebody can use. So, the committee can also work on questions of affordability, right? I just never gotten around to doing a big push with making sure that we have an aging population here. Does everybody know about, the senior tax freeze? Are there ways that we can talk about affordability? There's a lot that we can't do a lot. We can't change the demographics. We can't change the price of real estate. We can't do this. We can't do that. But if we're thinking out of the box, what can we do? I do know that there are a number of landlords that I've talked to over the last 3 years who do keep rents at a certain, there's a landlord who won't raise his rents more than 2% a year, right? And there are those people out there. How do you harness that kind of, not necessarily information, but how do you think out of the box when you think about affordability? And why can't we be thinking about it? Why can't we have conversations, right? There's no reason why we can't kind of make accommodations for landlords who are, I don't know what that looks like, but we can talk about it. We can talk about it. Yeah.
We go back to the zoning and also the planning board, because we have development projects that are not providing any housing whatsoever. So there are things we can do. And that's that proactive look again, where we say, look, we have an area that could be developed and we want to make sure we at least get some housing on it. And, we have a project that's being proposed on Grail Street with no housing whatsoever. And I think that's a big complaint of the public that, they might not be upset about the development. They're just upset that there's no housing component that's part of it. Right. So
I think one of the things Eileen brought up in the demographics from the census was really interesting. And I think we all felt it, like have felt it happening, but it was interesting to see the numbers that there is a need for smaller units. And, that means something from a development standpoint. The financial mechanics of that are different, when you're trying to honor your business model and also honor what the community needs. But I think, I don't know how we address that. I know that I looked into tiny homes. I've been part of the Tiny Home Association for years. Unfortunately, the ordinances that control the size of a property that you must put no smaller than, when you look at state requirements and city requirements and county requirements as well, to the extent that they influence us, we're kind of stuck, and that's not a viable option. But it's happening really creatively and really positively in other parts of the country. So it kind of tracks with the statistics that you were presenting, Elaine. Like, how do we address something like that? Because that's kind of a sideways way into the affordability question. right? And meets the needs that we're seeing are trending, which is smaller.
And there are ways to do it. I realize this is your conversation and not mine, but there are ways to do things like that in the city. You're fully built out, but you still have opportunities. I guarantee you that not every large home that has been subdivided into apartments did so up to code and got an inspection.
Oh, 100% no, yeah.
So if you had an amnesty program, you could officially.
Can we make that retroactive for about 4 years?
Sorry, 3.5 is as high as I go.
You know, there's opportunities for co-housing. There's all kinds of different ways, right, that you can look at something like this. There's one other statistic I meant to mention and I forgot. And it goes to the rental affordability issue, and that is nationally in New Jersey, about 35% of a community is rental. 65% ownership, 35% rental. Here in Lambertville, rental is only 22%. So the demand for rental units definitely outstrips the supply. And if there's a way to just increase the rental supply somehow, that eases price pressure.
Do you think the village apartments had something to do with that, or was that prior to Ida?
No, it was post Ida. It was, these are 2020, but these are 5-year estimates, so it straddles Ida. These are 2019 to
Probably doesn't
2023.
really.
Yeah, and that was, yeah. So that would change it a little bit. It might take it to 25% from 22.
And, you know, I hate to, nobody likes to talk about this, but I'm gonna throw it out there. You know, if we're serious about rental apartments, density is the way to get them on some of these products. And,
Right.
You know, I have to say, Lambertville has not shown a great enthusiasm for density. I would like us, as individuals and as a group, as a council, to really examine our policy, our thinking, our priorities. You know, what are we, we shouldn't have to, I don't know, to me, it's not about tolerating things, it's about creating opportunities for families to be here, right? So, you know, density is something that we don't want to talk about in Lambertville.
Well, that brings it back to the CBS site, which I think we all acknowledge was a great site for extra density, because it was, you know, bookend into the city. So, you know, at some point, I think the committee might want to make a recommendation about, is this an area for redevelopment, so we can put together our own plan and, you know, hope that either the buyer or the current owner is interested in doing something. I mean, I think that's the responsible thing to prevent further problems happening in the future. It's not saying we're gonna take your property, it's just, hey, we got a really good idea for it, and, you know, here it is, we're gonna do the work.
And oh, by the way, CVS, if you want to stay, here's a great spot for you right on the corner.
With all these new people that are gonna buy your products.
But yeah, which is the other thing that people forget, is it takes a lot of rooftops to support good retail.
One other thing somebody touched on earlier was communication and that sort of thing, and why public's not more engaged. 230-page reports that are so dense that, you know, like I say, I keep coming back with all these questions and I'm fully engaged in it. That's why they come to us and don't come to meetings, because they don't understand all this, and it's a big commitment to understand it all and to understand and then be able to explain it as opposed to just giving all the data. So just need to keep that in mind. So
That's my job next week, so I want to grade on that afterwards. Can I ask a question? As I said, I know this is not my meeting, but Michelle, you said something about conversations on Facebook. Would it be helpful if we sort of brought that in? I am not on Facebook. I jumped off Facebook a long time ago, so I don't see those, but it would be really helpful to know about them.
You know, well, the city after I was sworn in, the city re-examined its social media policy and made it much stricter. So, you know, we only use Facebook for posting announcements, and there's really a pretty strict policy about even about sort of employees or members of the council who are really engaging. You know, I feel very strongly that this is the forum. The public is the
Yeah,
And
but
I
you
get
said
that,
something
but-
that you were seeing stuff, so it's
Yeah.
not official, obviously.
Not from the city.
Yeah.
It's generally on one of the community pages, the Lambertville page, or not city, Lambertville community. There's a New Hope and Lambertville community page, a bunch of them, where someone will say, I'm moving into the area, I'm looking for a rental, this is my budget, and then the comments start. Or,
And we can
Yeah,
see
well,
that's
things-
definitely a supply problem.
it's a supply problem, it's a pricing problem, right? Because or someone will advertise the opposite of that. Someone will say, I have a unit for rent. It's lovely pictures, this is the location, and they usually don't post the price, because as soon as they do, somebody asks, what's the price? And they post the price, and then everyone, comes at them.
Yeah.
There's a business model, and if you're buying property and it is expensive and you've put money into getting it up to code, because now you're required to, you can't afford to rent for less than that. And some of the high rents, I understand how the numbers work. Some of those high rents, people are not getting rich on being a single or a double, or even up to 5, 6, 7 properties at those price points.
Yeah.
There's no margin on these, and the city fees have gone up. The state fees go up for buildings of 3 or more units, and on and on. The insurance has gone up and all those things. So I know other landlords that are, the investment now has become a hold pattern investment, and just looking for the long-term viability of a sale, and hopefully the property will appreciate. It is no longer very viable to think you're gonna, as a landlord, get, you're not making money on a monthly basis. It's just not happening, not in this day, not right now.
And I do remember something that a former mayor said about the retail environment here, which is years and years ago.
Mhm.
The retailer owned the building and lived upstairs, so it was not an investment that had it. Now they're all owned by organizations really that want a 15% return on their investment. And so retail rents, the same situation, exactly.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between a small property owner here, 1 to 8 units. That's not in separate buildings, but units,
Yeah.
I would say. And then it seems to me here, it jumps, and then you have 30 units. And that, to me, when you look at the overall number of housing units there are in a city our size, and you look at who owns the rentals, I would not be surprised to see if the majority of rentals are actually owned by a relatively small group of people, which is not a good balance to have.
It's not.
Because then you're then all the rates trend up. So another thing about how to encourage something, how to encourage more people to invest in the town in a small way, right? Maybe it's one property, and not everyone wants to be a landlord, not everybody should be a landlord, but it's an interesting topic.
It is, and I can speak personally to that because my husband and I bought a house on Church Street back in 2012 for a very 30-year-old townhouse, not very big. The mortgage is pretty low, and we kept the rent purposely low because it's important. It's important for the property to be in the black monthly, but it's not important for us to be making $1,800 a month or $700 a month or whatever, right? So, but flip side of that is we could never afford to buy a house now and rent it out for anywhere near what our tenant pays. We have a great tenant, and we've had 2 good tenants over the last 12 years. But we're talking about macroeconomic situations here, right? And buying income property in the small scale stuff, it's really hard to do. Spending $600,000 for a rental house, then it seems crazy to me. I couldn't do it, right? I mean, that's really a long-term investment unless you're just, that's a lot of money unless you have a ton of money, and that's just your business model, right? Why would that be your business model? So it's like, right? What's the point,
Why?
right?
Yes,
So,
why?
the affordability question, there's no doubt about it. It's hard, and it's not going to get any easier in town with the increases of our valuation. What is it, $70 million last year, something like that? It's incredible. So these are all real high assets. What's that?
5 5.4% or something.
I don't remember the exact percentage, but it was.
I remember the-
Thank you.
$52 million the year before.
Yeah,
So,
that's all COVID driven, a lot of it.
anyway. These are all things I think are good conversations to be having, and I think that we should be having in the public. So, we're definitely, I think we should continue to have them in public. So do we want to wrap that up for now? I would encourage you to think about things, if you want to send me things, which I can distribute to the group, for topics of conversation. I'm happy to meet with anybody individually, if you want to have, discussions about how this community could evolve into something different that would, serve a number of functions under the planning board or in, collaboration or sort of concentrating on the master plan, or whatever, right? So we've got a lot of stuff people are. So, public participation.
Wait, before you go there really quick, can I give some feedback on the report?
Yeah,
I mean,
in
real
fact,
quick?
let me ask,
Just,
I know that there are probably typos and other errors in here that are easily
I'll
fixed,
see.
so if you spot them, send them to me so that we can get them taken care of.
but the one thing I would comment on is you put appendix D in there. That's the one with the updated
Yes.
vacant land analysis.
Yep.
And table one, I mean, I understand you just took what was submitted from round 3 to the court, and you also put in that the properties that the vacant land that was identified for 2025. In there, they're highlighted in yellow, but there's no definite, I mean, and you need to go in
Yeah.
and say what the yellow means in that. And you also need, since table 1's the one that people first see when they open up, stress that that's how the 2018 RDP was determined.
Thank you,
Because it caused confusion.
thank you,
Okay.
thank you. This version right now is the version that the planning board has to evaluate, but we can put that as a change on the record
Yeah.
at the planning board hearing, and it'll go into the adopted version.
Okay. Because it just like, you're talking about, it has 0 RDP, but then you're showing something when you refer people to that appendix that has,
Got it.
a RDP of 41. What happened?
Okay.
Yeah.
Public participation. Yeah, oh, you can just stand up.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thanks. Just wanted to mention one thing towns do and have done in the past is do a visioning the community. You want to look forward, not only before you get to your master plan, but it's just to get that sense of community. Though I think in this town it'll be split. Half the people want 1955 and half the people want 1975. But anyway, I just wanted to, I was hoping there'd be a little more discussion on the round 4 plan and can make a couple of little comments. In talking about the Lambertville High School redevelopment site, I know for different reasons, both legally and other reasons, it has to be in the plan. It was also in the round 3 plan and part of litigation. On the other hand, I thought that the parts of it didn't really raise the potential that it may not be available. So I mentioned in it that it may, the impact of pollution up there could affect density, but it could also affect availability. We won't know for maybe 2 years what's really happening up there, because that's how long DEP, 18 months to 2 years, and I've been involved in these, it may take longer before we can figure out and identify major sources of pollution for the PFAS and other things. Secondly, you have a unlined and unclosed landfill, and who knows what that means, plus potential illegal dumping, and the high school itself really should have been the record side, because I know I didn't ever knew until, Sean, I guess, found the documents about that being a factory. So I just felt that that section did not really explain enough to fair share and to the master, the problem that's there, because I think this is something too that in 2018 and 2020 we didn't know about. And I think it should be explained a little more clearer and also to question not only the impact the development up there, but even the availability of the site, because it has to go through a full cleanup. We don't know any of that. It's a question mark. And then the second piece was partially from listening to previous conversations. But also, I was concerned that, the village apartments wasn't included, and there had been some discussions about the flood rules that have been proposed. Those rules are not in place. And even if there were, it does allow for waivers and hardships. And the main area of concern is this concept that the buildings have to be available by road or access. But there's a second piece to it, because the rules also allow you to have parking underneath. And there's also, so it's conflicting other sections, because one thing we know, I was on the committee originally when the stakeholder process. They do not want more fill. So if you have to build a road and you have to fill in, 6 feet of fill for a road, that's not going to happen. They also, their main concern is to have access for pedestrians for emergency access if there's flooding. So actually just having a sidewalk or boardwalk that's above with connecting the buildings would suffice. And then the other part too is that under the rules, if they came in with 44 units, they can do it by right, because New Jersey law allows you to rebuild the existing structures and elevate them. So we have a property owner. I know we've had meetings with them. I've talked to some people connected to them or working for them. But it seems that there is a real sincere effort to do some form of development, minimally the by right 44 units or some other factors that are being worked out or whatever. So I think it really should be included for that, because that rule really doesn't preclude it. And by the way, I hate to say this, because we do need this rule. The chances of that rule being signed in the next 6 months is probably pretty nil.
Thanks. If some agreement is struck with the owner of the department, say in the next couple months, we could create some sort of amendment.
Oh, and we say that.
Yeah.
We absolutely say that, if it is demonstrated that it can be realistically developed and provide affordable units, we'll amend the plan.
So,
The problem with putting it in now, and you know this, is once it's in, we're committed to it. And if it really can't be developed with any affordable units, then we gotta go back and figure out a way to replace those units.
yeah, and I would just stress, my recent conversations with the developer and the 1 or 2 conversations I had with the property owner and his representative, that they really are interested in moving forward. Obviously, the property's been vacant for 3.5 years now. They've been paying taxes on it. The city is ready to finish having these conversations. So we're ready on our end, and we're just waiting for these. We're waiting for one additional plan to arrive for our consideration. With respect to the narrative regarding the high school site and the 3rd round, that narrative was reviewed by myself and the city attorney. We I think diligently worked through that narrative to make sure that it represented what we see are now serious issues with the site. So I feel very comfortable with that narrative, having spent a lot of time working on it. So thanks for your feedback on that.
I could just add one thing there. Jeff, you asked some questions about the egress and also the flood restrictions, and that's honestly, I think, is unsettled. And that's something I have asked our city professionals to get more information about that. But that's the big holdup for a bigger development on that site, is the egress, as you indicated, and whether or not they're able to put parking underneath. And so what I've been told, and again, it's not confirmed because it hasn't been tested out in the courts yet, is that the new regulations do not allow for the parking to go underneath. To me, it doesn't make any sense,
No,
because
it's just, I have the rule. I'll send it to you, but there is a section that does allow that. So there's 2 pieces to the rule. One is the by right part that you can build. They still allow you to park underneath as long as you have outflows. So that's still
So you're
allowed.
saying they could do the same thing they have now, but they would have to put the parking underneath and elevate?
Yes.
yeah, no, I think that's right. But to do anything more, which obviously would have a big need for affordable housing, it'd be really nice if we could have some more affordable units at that spot. That's the question that I don't think we have answered yet. I don't know if we're gonna get an answer right now, just because.
Well,
it's
remember the
unsettled.
rule that you're talking about, that they're talking about with this access, with the egress. It's not adopted, it's not the rule. And there's also a grandfather clause. And I can tell you that in my conversations with both people in DEP and within the governor's office. The DEP wants the rule. I don't think the governor's office has not signed off, and the sense I get, it's not going to. I mean, you have to understand that by September, that rule will be dead. It's not adopted or be
And who
proposed.
knows what happens after the election too, so
Yeah, I just meant so,
But those issues, they are issues we are.
but they're not really issues because that's not the rule in place.
But the requirement to put parking underneath and elevate, that is in place.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay, which means if you look at how high those buildings are right now, what you're talking about is having them come up another, what, 12 feet?
no, I mean, I'm not sure
Just
what
in the
the,
back.
It's pretty close, and we did some, I don't know if you've seen this, but we did modeling.
Yeah, we
that
did, a
car
couple of years
units
ago.
and we
yeah, well, yeah, you
presented
still
that.
have to do the 3 foot, okay.
Um,
above the full zone.
Yeah, it's a tough site, no question about it.
what's the public? Have a motion to close the public comment period, please.
Just to note, there is no one online with a question. We have 2 people. I won't bring it.
Okay, great. Thanks for attending this evening, onliners. So moved. Second, please. Second. All in favor? Aye, thanks. Right, well, unless there's anything else from anybody, so moved. Just sit here quietly for a minute before I
May I
ask
say
the motion.
something
No, you can.
before we close?
Yeah.
This really would not have happened without, certainly wouldn't have happened as easily as it did without everybody here doing what they did to streamline the process, go through the sites. Basically, by the time we sat down to write the plan, the hard work was done. And that was because of this committee. So I want to say thank you to the committee for that.
Yeah, it's been an amazing amount of work, really. I mean, when you look at the spreadsheet and, you know, everything we've talked about and considered to date, and we still have a lot more to talk about. Good work. Thank you. I'll make a motion to adjourn. So. You're set.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you.
And please do send me any corrections. That would be much appreciated.